Elefant tank destroyer. When one of Porsche's tank designs was rejected by the German army, they found themselves with 90 chassis going spare, having produced them in a moment of overconfidence. At the conclusion of the Battle of Kursk, the German experience with the Ferdinand had been disappointing due to the constraints the large and heavy vehicle imposed, as well as desired improvements that needed to be implemented to the design. Recalled back to the factories in January 1944, the Ferdinand underwent design improvements such as the inclusion of a bow machine gun, a commander's cupola, application of Zermatt and other changes to the armor profile for better blast and shrapnel protection of the engines. These modifications were completed and began to be sent back into combat as early as February. By May 1944, an order was made by German Army High Command that the Ferdinand was to assume the new name Elefant. The Elefant continued to see use, notably in the Italian theater and the Eastern Front, all the way until the Battle of Berlin in 1945. The Elefant, SD.KFZ. Index, SD.KFZ. 184, was introduced during Update Wind of Change as reward for Battle Pass, Season 7, Armored Elephant. Aside from the addition of the machine gun and cupola, the vehicle is functionally the same as the standard Ferdinand, boasting the long 88mm Pak 43 cannon to penetrate all types of armor and an impressive 200mm frontal plate for protection. However, the Elefant is big, heavy, and slow, so being outnumbered by the enemy can quickly lead to a lucky few of them to outflank and destroy the Elefant through its very long side profile, where the armor is thin, or the protruding casemate structure, where the ammunition is stored. However, players maximizing the Elefant's long-range capabilities can quickly lock down a sector of the map from anyone who dares roll into the 88mm's sight. It is dusk on July 17, 1943. The Red Army has not only withstood Hitler's Operation Citadel to eliminate the Kursk salient, but it has launched its own offensive. On Kursk's northern front, the Soviets continue to hammer at the exhausted left flank of the German 9th Army from the direction of Milo-Archangelsk. Hauptmann Rolf Henning's Kampfgruppe stands in the path of this counterattack. Before the day is over, the Kampfgruppe has decisively smashed the attack, destroying 22 Soviet tanks, some at more than 2,500 meters. Henning was personally responsible for 10 of the kills, while Lieutenant Hermann Feldheim tallied 11 more. Both were vehicle commanders in one of Hitler's new wonder weapons at Kursk, the heavy tank destroyer, Jagdpanzer, Ferdinand. Named in honor of Ferdinand Porsche, the Ferdinand, which was later renamed the Elefant, had a decisive effect in any armored clash in which it participated. The Ferdinand had its origins as Porsche's failed entry into the heavy tank competition for what would eventually be the famous Tiger tank. Being a friend of German leader Adolf Hitler, his design was expected to win. However, test trials in 1942 showed the Porsche model failed in deep mud and its drive system was mechanically unreliable, thus the Henschel model was selected. Assuming his design would win, Porsche already had stored 100 Krupp-built hulls at the Nibelungenwerk in St. Valentin, Austria. He submitted a proposal to build a heavy tank destroyer using these hulls. The specifications for this stirless vehicle included a maximum frontal armor thickness of 200 mm and use of the 88 mm Pak 43 halves anti-tank gun, the most powerful in Germany at the time. An order was issued in October 1942 for the conversion of 90 hulls into the new tank destroyer. Porsche supervised the development of the vehicle. Layout began with the standard formula used in Germany. The design called for the driving compartment to be placed in the front, the fighting compartment in the middle, and 2 engines in the rear. To compensate for the recoil of its main gun, designers extended the back of the casement to the back of the hull. With the main gun now firmly placed toward the rear of the chassis, the engines were relocated into the middle of the vehicle. Officially named the Ferdinand on February 6, 1943, the vehicle required a crew of 6. The driver and radio operator were situated at the front of the vehicle. The vehicle's commander, gunner, and 2 loaders were situated in the fighting compartment. As the main purpose of the vehicle was to destroy tanks, it boasted an 88 mm Pak 43 halves L71 gun. Fixed tracks allowed for 36 rounds of armor-piercing or high-explosive ammunition, Although the vehicle could carry as many as 90 rounds when necessary, the gun was so powerful that it could penetrate the front armor of the Soviet IS-2 at 2,300 meters, which was well before the IS-2 could get into the range of 500 meters to fire a round that could penetrate the Ferdinand. Unfortunately, the German designers failed to install a secondary machine gun, and this turned out to be a major flaw during combat on the Eastern Front. For survival in battle, the 100 mm hull front armor was doubled by the addition of a 100 mm bolted-on plate, making the Ferdinand practically impenetrable. Even the heavy Soviet Joseph Stalin tank hit us many times on the frontal armor without any effect, said Emanuel Schlenska, a Ferdinand gun commander. Both the hull and superstructure sides had an armor thickness of 80 mm, while the tops of both were 30 mm and the hull bottom a mere 20 mm thick. A pair of V12 265 horsepower Maybach HL 120 petrol engines powered the Ferdinand. The arrangement of the two engines, fuel tanks, generator, and drive motors in such a confined space, though, frequently resulted in overheating from an inadequate air supply to the carburetors. This design flaw plagued the vehicle throughout its service. The engines were extremely loud and could reportedly be heard up to 5 miles away. Supporting this armored giant, which had a combat weight near 69 tons, was a suspension system differing from the conventional German tank design, as the Porsche design did not possess return rollers. The heaviest armor fighting vehicle of the time when it went into battle, the Ferdinand was 26 feet, 8 inches long, with its gun, and slightly more than 11 feet wide, and 9 feet, 9 inches tall. Its sheer bulk adversely affected its speed and range. The heavy tank destroyer had a maximum speed of only 19 miles per hour and a cross-country range of just 55 miles. It took the Germans a relatively short time to build the initial 90 Ferdinands. Production began at the Nibel Enginework plant on February 16, 1943. The last vehicle rolled out of the plant 3 months later. The Wehrmacht established 2 heavy tank destroyer battalions, each having 45 Ferdinands, on March 22. Designated as heavy tank destroyer battalions, they were numbered 653 and 654. Heavy Tank Destroyer Regiment 656 was established on June 8. The regiment combined the 2 battalions under the overall command of Ipsel der Reserve Baron Ernst von Jungenfeld. The regiment also included a battalion that fielded the Neustrom Panzer IV. The battalions did not get any time to train together. Heavy Tank Destroyer Regiment 656 began its trek eastward toward Orel on June 9. As part of Field Marshal Walter Model's 9th Army, the regiment was placed under the command of the Zsksi Panzer Corps. The various elements had arrived at the designated assembly point by July 1. Positioned on the far left wing, the Ferdinand's combat debut was about to take place in Operation Citadel. For the initial push, both heavy Jagdpanzer battalions would go into action on level ground in support of the 86th Infantry Division. After penetrating enemy lines, Regiment 654 would switch its support to the 292nd Infantry Division, also of the XLI Panzer Corps. The Orel-Kursk Railway was the boundary line. Regiment 653 would deploy east of the railway, and 654 would deploy west of the railway. Before combat began, 6 Ferdinands had to be withdrawn for repairs. It was a bad omen. Operation Citadel began at 3:40 a.m. on July 5. The first objective for Regiment 656 was Hill 257.7, the cornerstone of the Soviet defenses in the area. The combination of a powerful gun and impenetrable front armor proved a lethal combination as the Ferdinands overran the first of 3 Soviet defensive lines. Reports stated the regiment destroyed several anti-tank guns and 26 T-34 tanks. However, dozens of the Ferdinands succumbed to enemy mines. Although the Ferdinand was an unexpected surprise to Soviets, they soon learned that, like any armored fighting vehicle, the tracks proved highly vulnerable to anti-tank fire. Being such large targets, the Ferdinands were a magnet for enemy artillery. Because of this, German infantrymen were reluctant to follow closely behind the heavy Jagd Panthers. This lack of infantry support was more of a factor than the lack of the hull machine gun. Post-war stories of Soviet crews knocking out Ferdinands with Molotov cocktails have been exaggerated. Despite the regiment having achieved all of its objectives, shattering the Red Army's first line of defense and critically weakening its second, only 12 Ferdinands remained operational at the end of the day. Soviet mines and anti-tank fire had disabled the tracks and suspensions of the majority of the Ferdinands. Soviet artillery had completely destroyed 2 of the vehicles. Upon inspection, it turned out that the engine grating was not thick enough and the spacing was too wide, which allowed shrapnel to cripple the engines. In the drive for the fortified village of Bony Rye the following day, the Ferdinands engaged the Su-152 self-propelled heavy howitzer. Although not designed as a tank destroyer, the Soviets found it was the only vehicle capable of destroying the Panzerkampfwagen Tiger tank. Duels at up to 3,000 meters occurred, with 1 Ferdinand lost and several Su-152s knocked out. The Ferdinand's high velocity,